Everyone warned Melissa to stay quiet, to not make trouble at her new lakeside home. But when the HOA president, Karen, threw her passport into a sewer drain like it was garbage, she didn't stay silent. Because what Karen didn't know was that Melissa's brother wasn't just any government employee. He was the senior director who could snap his fingers and end Karen's entire empire. And he did. Melissa had only been living at Lakeshore Heights for 3 weeks when she first met Karen. It was early morning. Fog rolled gently over the water. Melissa was sitting on the porch of her rented lake cabin, sipping coffee and filling out immigration paperwork. Her U.S. passport, freshly renewed, sat beside her laptop. It was her ticket back to her job overseas, where she worked as a senior environmental consultant. But today, she wasn't thinking about work. She was just enjoying the silence. The calm before everything changed. Karen arrived in a golf cart. Not a friendly wave or introduction. Just a clipboard in hand and the look of someone who thought she owned the entire lake. "You can't leave your trash bins by the driveway. That's a code violation," she barked, even before stepping out. Melissa stood politely, unsure whether to smile or speak. She'd heard of HOA nightmares, but she hadn't expected one to show up on her third cup of coffee. "I'm not sure which bins you mean," Melissa replied, her voice calm. Karen didn't answer. Instead, her eyes dropped to the small table, to the blue-covered passport lying next to the coffee mug. Her expression changed. "You're not from here, are you?" Karen asked. Melissa blinked. "I'm a U.S. citizen. I work abroad, but this is my permanent home." Karen gave a tight smile. "Well, that passport shouldn't be lying around. People might get the wrong idea." It was such a strange comment that Melissa just nodded and began closing her laptop. Karen stepped closer, too close. Reached for the passport and picked it up without permission. "Excuse me," Melissa said, alarm rising. Karen waved her off. "Just making sure everything's in order." Before Melissa could react, Karen turned, and with one smooth, deliberate motion, tossed the passport down the side grate near the road. It disappeared with a soft splash into the sewer below. Melissa froze. For a second, she thought she imagined it. "Did you just?" Karen smiled. "Welcome to Lakeshore Heights. We expect our residents to follow the rules." Melissa was shaking. Her hands trembled with silent rage. That was federal property. Karen shrugged, already climbing back into her cart. "Maybe next time, you'll think twice before ignoring our bylaws. That coffee table? Not approved outdoor furniture." And then she drove off, leaving Melissa speechless. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She stood there for a long time, eyes locked on the drain, heart pounding. That passport wasn't just a document. It was her identity. Her job. Her future. Her entire life was now held hostage by a woman on a power trip. But what Karen didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that Melissa wasn't alone. She had family. Powerful family. An hour later, Melissa sat in her car, phone pressed tightly to her ear. On the other end of the line was her older brother, Daniel. To most people, he was just Dan from Washington. But to the Federal Housing Administration and half of the land grant departments in the state, he was Director Daniels. Quiet, composed, but with a reach that extended into places Karen's clipboard could never touch. "She threw it where?" Daniel asked, his voice low. "Sewer drain," Melissa whispered. "On purpose." She smiled after. "I swear." Silence. Then, a long sigh. "Send me the exact address of the HOA. I'll take care of it." Melissa didn't ask how. She just obeyed. She sent the GPS pin and a short video she'd caught on her doorbell cam. Karen standing on her porch, picking up the passport, and tossing it like trash. It wasn't long, but it was enough. That evening, Karen stood proudly at the Lakeside board meeting. Her pearls glinted under the white fluorescent lights. As president of this community, I propose we increase the non-compliance fines by 20%, she announced. Her supporters clapped politely. She basked in it. Then the doors opened. A group of plainclothes federal officers walked in, followed by two sharp-suited men with briefcases. They didn't say a word at first, just passed a folder to the stunned HOA secretary. Karen's smile faltered as the secretary's eyes widened. "What is this?" Karen asked, voice brittle. "An audit," one of the men replied. "Of your financial dealings, land transfers, and personal conduct as acting HOA president." Karen's face turned pale. She looked at the paper again, and saw the signature at the bottom. Daniel A. Wickham, Director, Federal Property Oversight Division. Karen's pearl necklace didn't shine so brightly anymore. Her hands, usually steady and polished, now trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the meeting table. "This must be a mistake," she said, attempting a smile. "We run everything by the book here." One of the federal men glanced at her calmly. "That's what the audit will determine." The room, which had been filled with polite nods and HOA gossip just moments before, fell silent. Some board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others pretended to read their phones. No one came to Karen's defense. Not even the vice president, who suddenly seemed very interested in the ceiling tiles. Karen looked again at the paper. The name Daniel A. Wickham stared back at her like a ghost from a grave she didn't know she'd dug herself. She had no idea who he was, but something about the formality of the signature, the government seal, and the phrase personal conduct made her stomach tighten. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. The officers didn't linger. They handed out more envelopes, each one stamped and marked, then turned and left, leaving behind a silence thick enough to drown in. Karen watched them go, her face frozen in a smile she could no longer control. Back at her cabin, Melissa sat on the porch again, same spot, same coffee mug, but now no passport. She hadn't said a word to the neighbors. Not to the security guard. Not even online. It wasn't her way to make noise. But justice didn't need volume. It needed patience. She received a text from her brother at 10:13 p.m. that night. "She won't sleep for weeks. Let me know when you're ready for Phase 2. Melissa stared at the message. Phase 2? She didn't know what he meant exactly, but she trusted Daniel. Growing up, he had always been calm but strategic. When someone pushed Melissa in school, he didn't punch them, he got their after-school privileges revoked through the principal. When their landlord raised rent illegally during college, Daniel didn't shout, he found a law clause and got their next 3 months rent-free. He believed in doing things the right way. And the right way always worked, if you were patient enough. The next morning, Karen woke up to a banging on her door. She rushed downstairs in her robe, hair messy, still shaken from the audit notice the night before. It wasn't police, not yet, but something she feared even more. A crowd. 8 neighbors stood outside her house, led by a man she barely knew, Dennis, from Lot 14. "We need to talk, Karen," he said firmly. "About the budget. And the missing funds from last quarter." "What are you talking about?" Karen asked, already feeling the sweat on her palms. Dennis raised his phone. "I got an email last night, some internal report. You know anything about this?" Karen blinked. "What email?" But Dennis wasn't the only one. Another woman stepped forward. Jenna, who had once baked Karen banana bread when she moved in. "Why did you authorize payment for a security company that doesn't even show up? There's an invoice here with your name on it." Karen's voice rose, panicked now. "I don't need to explain myself to Yes, you do, Dennis interrupted. You're not untouchable, Karen. We've all just been too scared to stand up. But someone clearly isn't. Karen's mouth opened, but she couldn't find the words. She stepped back inside and shut the door quietly. Her hands trembled as she picked up her phone. She scrolled through her messages, searching for someone, anyone, who could help. But it was too late. The audit had sparked curiosity. Curiosity had opened doors. And behind every door was something she thought would stay buried. That afternoon, Melissa received a knock on her door. It was the HOA secretary, a quiet woman named Beatrice who always avoided conflict. "Hi," Beatrice said, her voice soft. I just wanted to apologize. For not stepping in. That day." Melissa nodded. She appreciated the honesty. Beatrice handed her a paper. It was a formal report of the incident, along with a signed statement describing Karen's behavior. "I thought you should have a copy," Beatrice said, then turned and walked away before Melissa could thank her. Melissa folded the paper slowly. It was small, but it mattered. Every piece of this mattered. She texted Daniel, "Let's do phase 2. Across town, Daniel sat in his government office, glasses low on his nose. He smiled when he saw her message and stood up, picking up a thick file from his desk. It was labeled Lakeshore Heights, HOA Review, Allegations of Misconduct, Fraud and Abuse of Power. Daniel adjusted his jacket, picked up his keys, and said to his assistant, "Book me a meeting with the State Property Commission. It's time." Karen stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, eyes bloodshot and shoulders tense. For the first time in years, she didn't feel in control. She had built her identity around authority, around people stepping back when she walked in. But now, no one was stepping back. They were stepping forward. Questioning her. Whispering. Watching. She kept checking her email every 10 minutes, hoping it was all some overreaction, a mistake, maybe a prank by some bitter neighbor. But no. There were more emails now. Some from residents asking about financial records. Others from the HOA board requesting an emergency meeting. And then there was the one that chilled her to the bone. Lakeshore Heights HOA has been scheduled for formal state inquiry. Audit assistants and personnel will arrive next Thursday. Her hands went numb. Meanwhile, Melissa sat cross-legged on her couch, reading the same email, forwarded by her brother, but her reaction was the complete opposite. Her lips curled into a faint, satisfied smile. She didn't enjoy revenge. That wasn't her goal. But consequences? Real consequences? They mattered. She thought back to that morning, Karen's smirk, the flick of her wrist, the splash of her passport disappearing into the sewer drain. It wasn't about a document. It was about being dismissed, disrespected, and erased. That feeling, that small, sharp ache of being humiliated in your own space, it didn't fade easily. And now Karen would sit with that feeling for a very long time. Melissa stepped outside. The sun was warm, and the lake sparkled like it had no memory of yesterday's storm. She could hear the rustling of lawn mowers and birds in the trees. For the first time since moving in, she felt like the neighborhood was starting to shift, just a little, into something better. Down the road, Karen made a desperate call. She dialed Marlene, her lawyer friend from the city. "Marlene, I need help. There's an investigation coming down on the HOA, and..." "Karen," Marlene interrupted sharply, "did you forge resident signatures on expenditure forms?" Karen's breath caught. I mean, maybe I reused a few from older meetings." Marlene exhaled audibly. "That's document tampering. That alone could cost you your license." "I don't have a license," Karen whispered. There was silence. "That's worse," Marlene said, her voice flat. Then what are you even doing managing HOA contracts and budgets? Karen didn't answer. She ended the call and threw her phone across the room. It bounced off the couch and hit the floor with a thud. She sat down, slowly, overwhelmed by the weight of everything closing in. Meanwhile, Daniel stood in a high-rise building downtown, overlooking a stretch of blueprints and property maps laid out on a glass table. Several officials from the state's Housing and Development Department sat across from him. This community, Daniel said, pointing to the Lakeshore Heights parcel, was flagged for financial irregularities and multiple complaints of harassment from the current HOA leadership. I've submitted 10 years of audit reports, cross-referenced with the county land registry, and it's clear, Karen Morgan has been misusing authority and processing unauthorized payments. One commissioner looked up. Are you requesting a full dissolution of the HOA? Daniel nodded. I am. It's not about one bad policy. It's about abuse of power and destruction of resident trust. The room fell silent. Then, the chairwoman leaned back. Approved. You'll have our support. We'll dispatch state representatives to the property within 72 hours. Daniel simply said, "Thank you," and gathered his papers. Back at the lake, Melissa walked toward her mailbox and found a small envelope addressed to her. No return label. She opened it slowly and pulled out a torn corner of blue paper, a piece of her passport. With a handwritten note. You shouldn't have gone this far. People don't forget things like this. There was no name. No signature. Just those words and the ripped paper. Melissa stared at it for a long time. It wasn't fear that filled her. It was sadness, because even now, even with everything collapsing around her, Karen was still trying to scare her instead of simply apologizing. She folded the note carefully, walked to the shed in her backyard, and placed it in a plastic folder with the label, Evidence, HOA Threats. Later that night, Karen stood alone at the edge of the lake, staring out over the still water. Her empire was crumbling, and she knew it. But in her mind, she wasn't the villain. She was the victim. She had worked hard for this neighborhood. She'd organized block parties, cleaned graffiti, handled noise complaints. She had controlled everything. But now she was losing control. And it terrified her. She turned around, and froze. Melissa stood a few feet away, holding a flashlight. I know you wrote the note, she said softly. Karen said nothing. Her eyes were hollow. You didn't just destroy a passport, Melissa continued. You tried to destroy me. But here's the thing, I don't break easy. Karen's voice cracked. I was just trying to protect this neighborhood. Melissa stepped forward. Then you should have started by protecting its people. Karen looked away. Melissa took one last look, then turned and walked back up the hill toward her cabin, the light from her porch slowly growing brighter in the distance. Karen stayed by the lake, her reflection trembling in the ripples beneath her. The next morning, the neighborhood felt different. A quiet hum buzzed in the air, not from lawnmowers or birds, but from the whispered conversations happening on every porch, inside every garage, and in each community text group. The HOA office, once seen as a place of order, was now being called Karen's Castle. No one said it out loud in front of her, not yet, but the tone had changed. People were waking up. Melissa sat by her window with a hot mug of tea. She watched as a slow stream of residents walked toward the clubhouse. A notice had gone out the night before, emergency community meeting, state oversight present. That last part had made people curious. Curious enough to show up. At 9 a.m. sharp, 2 state officials walked into the HOA clubhouse. They wore gray suits, calm faces, and carried leather folders. Behind them came Daniel, crisp white shirt, dark slacks, and a badge clipped to his belt. Melissa's heart tightened when she saw him through the clubhouse window. He looked calm. Unbothered. But she knew this wasn't just a meeting to him. This was personal. Karen stood near the podium, trying to keep her chin high. But even from a distance, Melissa could tell her hands were trembling again. Her usual confidence had drained out over the past few days like water from a cracked vase. She had no idea how to patch it. One of the officials stepped forward and spoke. "Thank you for coming. We are here today to conduct a formal review of this HOA's operations, leadership behavior, and financial practices. We have received numerous complaints and reports, and today, those concerns will be addressed openly." Gasps moved through the room. People leaned forward. Karen opened her mouth to object, but Daniel stepped forward before she could speak. "My name is Daniel Wickham," he said, projecting calm authority. "Director of Property Oversight. I'm here representing not just the state, but the residents whose voices have been silenced by this HOA's misuse of power." He turned to the audience. "This is not about politics. This is not about revenge. This is about accountability." Melissa, standing quietly near the door, felt a rush of pride in her chest. Karen raised her hand shakily. "Excuse me." Daniel didn't let her finish. "Karen Morgan, you are hereby suspended from acting as HOA president effective immediately, pending the outcome of this investigation." Karen's knees buckled slightly. "You can't do that." "I just did," he said softly. An audible gasp filled the room. Some people clapped quietly. Others just watched, stunned. Karen tried to argue. "You have no idea how hard I've worked for this community. I've given everything." Daniel didn't raise his voice. He just opened a folder and began reading. Unauthorized budget reallocations. Forged signatures on expense forms. Destruction of federal property. Harassment. Retaliation. He closed the folder. "Shall I continue?" Karen took a step back, her face drained of color. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Dennis, the neighbor from Lot 14, stood up from the front row. "I move that we dissolve this HOA entirely and start fresh. One without intimidation, without fraud, and without fear." A wave of agreement echoed through the crowd. People who had been silent for years finally spoke up. "Seconded." "Agreed." "I support it." Karen stood there like a statue, her hands clenched at her sides. She looked around the room, searching for someone to defend her. No one did. By noon, a formal vote was underway. Daniel and the state officials facilitated the process, allowing each resident to speak if they wished. Melissa didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. Her story had already been told, in Karen's actions, in the audit reports, and in the silent solidarity of the neighbors who now saw clearly. When the vote was counted, it wasn't even close. HOA dissolved, 73 yes, 4 no. It was over. Karen didn't stay for the closing remarks. She left quietly through the back door, head low, keys shaking in her hands. No one followed her. No one stopped her. She got into her car and drove away, past the lake, past the clubhouse, past Melissa's cabin. Melissa stood at her gate and watched her go. No smile. No victory dance. Just a quiet sense of balance restored. That evening, Daniel and Melissa sat on the porch together. The lake shimmered under the fading light, calm and beautiful once more. "You okay?" he asked her. Melissa nodded. "I didn't think it would ever end." Daniel smiled gently. "Bullies always fall. They just fall slower when they wear suits and carry clipboards." Melissa laughed softly. Then her eyes turned serious. "You didn't have to do all this." "Yes, I did," he said. "You're my sister. And no one gets to throw your name, your rights, or your passport into the gutter." She leaned her head against his shoulder. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. Far away, in a dim motel on the edge of town, Karen stared at her reflection in a dusty mirror. Her pearls were gone. Her phone was silent. Her power, the thing she had clung to so tightly, had vanished. And for the first time in her life, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't feared anymore. She was forgotten. The following week brought a new stillness to Lakeshore Heights, not the uncomfortable silence of tension, but a quiet peace that seemed to settle over the lake like morning fog. Neighbors smiled more. Fewer notes were left on mailboxes. The clubhouse bulletin board was no longer littered with Karen's rigid rules and fine notices. Instead, someone had posted a sign in handwritten block letters. Community over control, let's start fresh. Melissa noticed it while walking to her mailbox. She paused, then smiled softly. Things weren't perfect yet, but they were healing. And healing always took time. Inside her cabin, a fresh temporary passport lay on the table, expedited by Daniel's contacts. Her flight back to Europe for her consulting work was just 2 weeks away. Still, something tugged at her. She wasn't quite ready to leave yet. Not until one final piece was in place. That evening, she attended a community gathering at the lakeside fire pit. For the first time, neighbors introduced themselves properly. Someone brought hot cider. A couple grilled marshmallows. Children laughed nearby. And the same residents who once avoided eye contact with Melissa now came up to shake her hand. "I saw what she did to you," one woman whispered. "I wanted to speak out back then, but I was scared." Melissa nodded. "It's okay. You're here now." Dennis raised a toast with his plastic cup. "To the end of tyranny, and to neighbors who stand up when it matters." Cheers followed. It wasn't a party. It was a release. But across town, in that same rundown motel, Karen was unraveling. She stared at the laptop in front of her. Every few hours, she refreshed her email, hoping someone, anyone, had reached out. No one had. Her bank account was under investigation. Her HOA debit card had been frozen. Her name was spreading through housing forums as a cautionary tale. She couldn't even get into her Facebook group for local HOA leaders. Someone had reported her, and the admin banned her. She called Marlene again. Voicemail. She tried Dennis. No answer. She sat still for a moment. Then opened a blank email and began typing. To Lakeshore Heights Community Group at gmail.com. Subject, a formal statement from Karen Morgan. But halfway through typing, her fingers stopped. What could she even say? That she was sorry? That she didn't mean to throw someone's passport into a sewer? That it was a misunderstanding? She couldn't bring herself to do it. Her pride was louder than her regret. Instead, she deleted the draft and shut the laptop hard. Back at the lake, Melissa received a letter the next day, an official document stamped with the seal of the State Housing Commission. She opened it slowly. "We are pleased to inform you that Lakeshore Heights is now officially registered as a self-managed community under resident-led governance. All former HOA restrictions, policies, and penalties have been nullified. The HOA corporation has been dissolved." Melissa folded the letter carefully and placed it beside her new passport. It was over. Truly over. Later that day, she walked along the edge of the lake. The water was calm, and the wind played gently through the trees. As she reached the bend near the old HOA office, she noticed a familiar figure standing nearby. Karen. She looked different, thinner, more tired, her posture hunched. Her clothes, once crisp and pristine, now looked worn. Melissa slowed down, unsure what to do. Karen turned and saw her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Karen walked over. Her eyes were red, but her voice was low and steady. "I came to say something," she said. Melissa didn't move. Karen took a breath. "I was wrong. I let power go to my head. I hurt people. I hurt you." Silence again. "I don't expect forgiveness," Karen added. "But I didn't want to leave without saying it." Melissa's jaw tightened. She didn't trust this woman. Not fully. Maybe never would. But she could see the sincerity, or maybe the shame, behind Karen's eyes. Melissa spoke softly. "You didn't just throw my passport, Karen. You tried to erase me." Karen's eyes dropped. "I know. And if my brother hadn't stepped in," Melissa shook her head, "I would have been stuck. Helpless. Trapped here. I never meant." "You did," Melissa cut her off. "You meant to. That's the part that hurts the most." Karen nodded slowly, accepting it. Melissa turned away, but paused. "You have a long road ahead, Karen. But maybe this is where you start walking it." She walked off without waiting for a reply. Karen stood alone on the gravel path, the sound of leaves rustling above her and water lapping softly in the distance. That night, Melissa sat under the stars, looking out at the peaceful lake. Daniel called just as the sky turned indigo. "I got word the county is using Karen's old property to build a public park," he said with a chuckle. "Isn't that something?" Melissa smiled. "That's exactly what it should be." Daniel paused. "So, what now? You still planning to head back overseas?" Melissa was quiet for a moment. Then, she looked around her, the lake, the porch, the breeze. "I'm not sure," she whispered. "For the first time in a long time, this feels like home." 2 weeks passed, and Lakeshore Heights continued to settle into its new rhythm. Without Karen's rulebook looming over them, the residents began to rediscover the purpose of their community, not regulation, but connection. The clubhouse was transformed. What was once a sterile meeting space now held warmth, local art hung on the walls, kids' drawings filled the bulletin board, and every Friday evening, neighbors gathered for potluck dinners. There were no fines, no warnings, no silent threats taped to doors, just the smell of home-cooked food and laughter rolling over the lake like it finally belonged there. Melissa had stayed longer than planned. Her consulting job in Europe offered flexibility, and she realized something she hadn't felt in years. She wanted to belong somewhere. Not just visit. Not just pass through. She wanted roots. One morning, she stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window. A crisp breeze danced across the trees, and golden light flickered on the surface of the water. She held her coffee tighter and exhaled deeply. There was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Jenna, the same neighbor who once stayed silent during Karen's reign, standing there with a welcome basket of fresh scones and a folded piece of paper. "I heard you're thinking about staying," Jenna said with a shy smile. Melissa smiled back. "Thinking about it. Haven't made a final decision yet." "Well, if you do," Jenna said, handing her the paper, "the community board asked if you'd consider helping organize the new resident council. Nothing formal. Just, someone they trust." Melissa hesitated. Not because she was unsure, but because the offer meant something. Real trust, not forced authority. It was the opposite of what Karen had built. And maybe that was exactly why Melissa felt ready to accept. "I'll think about it," she said, tucking the note under her arm. "But thank you." Jenna beamed and walked away, the sound of her footsteps light against the gravel. Later that afternoon, Melissa drove into town to pick up a few things. On the way back, she stopped by a small bookstore. As she walked through the front doors, she noticed a woman sitting alone in a back corner, hair tied back, sunglasses perched awkwardly on her head. It was Karen. Melissa's first instinct was to turn around. But something made her pause. Karen hadn't seen her. She sat quietly, flipping through a worn notebook, occasionally underlining something with a cheap pen. Her clothes were plain, her hair no longer styled. She looked like someone trying hard not to be seen. Melissa hesitated. She didn't owe Karen anything, not a greeting, not kindness, not even recognition. But as she turned to leave, Karen glanced up. Their eyes met. For a second, Karen flinched, expecting judgment. But Melissa didn't say anything. She didn't frown or glare. She just gave the faintest nod, not of approval, but of acknowledgement. Then she walked out. Back at the lake, Daniel had arrived for a weekend visit. They grilled dinner on the deck and ate under the open sky. "So," he said between bites of charred corn, "are you really thinking about staying for good?" Melissa leaned back in her chair, eyes on the stars. "Maybe. For the first time, I'm not running from something. I'm not chasing anything either. I'm just here." Daniel nodded. "That's rare. Hold on to it." She smiled. "I think I will." They talked late into the night, about childhood memories, their late parents, the differences between justice and revenge. Daniel shared that Karen's actions had inspired new legislation around HOA transparency, a small ripple that could create big waves. "And what about her?" Melissa asked finally. Daniel looked out over the lake. "She'll fade out. No title, no power, no audience. That's the real consequence for someone like her." Melissa didn't respond. She knew Daniel was right. People like Karen didn't need prison. They needed to be seen, truly seen, for who they were. And then, forgotten. A week later, the county officially transferred ownership of Karen's former private lakeside plot to the public. The space would be turned into a garden park, open for all, maintained by volunteers, built with donations. No fences. No gates. Melissa attended the opening ceremony, standing among her neighbors as children ran laughing through the grass. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who once ruled the neighborhood had her land turned into a place where everyone was welcome. As the mayor cut the ribbon and balloons floated into the sky, someone handed Melissa a small plaque. She turned it over and read the inscription. "For Melissa Wickham, who reminded us that silence is not strength, and strength is not control." Her eyes watered. She didn't expect recognition. She didn't fight for it. But this felt different. This felt like healing. For her. For the community. For the story that started with a passport and ended with a park. That night, Melissa stood once again on her porch, gazing out at the moonlit water. This time, she didn't feel like a visitor. She felt home. Autumn crept gently over Lakeshore Heights. The trees, once lush and green, now burned gold and rust-red in the cool breeze. Melissa wrapped a light scarf around her neck as she stepped onto the porch, her footsteps soft on the wooden planks. The lake reflected the sky like glass, and the quiet was no longer lonely, it was peaceful. A month had passed since the park opened. The garden had bloomed faster than anyone expected. Residents came together each weekend, planting, watering, building benches, and painting little birdhouses. There was laughter where tension used to live. Where HOA bylaws once choked the spirit of the place, now there were picnics, bonfires, and shared meals. People talked. People smiled. People belonged. Melissa became a regular at the new meetings, not as a leader with rules, but as a listener with calm. She helped coordinate events, offered her shed for gardening tools, and answered questions about her consulting work when curious teenagers asked. Her presence had become something quietly steady in the community, like a lighthouse no one noticed until they needed it. But deep down, she knew a new season was coming for her too. That morning, she sat at her table with an envelope in hand, her formal job offer from the United Nations Environmental Task Force. A promotion. Better pay. Relocation to Geneva. It was everything she had worked toward. And yet. She looked outside at the small park that once belonged to Karen. 2 children were flying a kite, their laughter rising with the wind. Dennis walked by with a coffee in hand and waved. Somewhere, someone played soft guitar from an open garage. Melissa smiled, and gently pushed the envelope aside. She wasn't going. Not yet. Later that day, she visited the park alone. She stood beneath the maple tree that had become the center of the garden. A plaque was nailed to its base now, one that the community had placed together. Let this be a place where no one is above, no one is below, and everyone belongs. She knelt and pulled a few weeds near the flowers. Her hands dug into the dirt, and she felt grounded, not just physically, but emotionally. Her story had started here with a theft, of her passport, her dignity, her place. But now, she had reclaimed all of it. Just as she stood, a familiar voice behind her broke the stillness. You turned it into something beautiful. She turned. And there stood Karen. Not as she once was. There were no pearls, no clipboard, no confident stride. Just a woman in jeans and a hoodie, holding a small paper bag of seeds. Melissa didn't move, unsure what to say. Karen glanced around the garden. I'm not here to cause trouble. I heard the park was opening this section to wildflowers. Melissa didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either. Karen stepped closer, holding out the bag. I don't expect anything. Just thought maybe something good could still grow from me. Even now. There was a long silence. Then Melissa gently took the bag and opened it. Inside were native wildflower seeds, lavender, black-eyed Susans, and poppies. She looked at Karen. Plant them yourself. Karen blinked. Are you serious? Melissa stepped aside and motioned to the soil beside the tree. If you want to leave something behind that isn't damage, do it yourself. Karen looked like she might cry. She dropped to her knees and began to dig with her hands. Slowly. Carefully. Melissa didn't help. She just watched. And when Karen finished, she stood, wiped her hands, and gave a small nod, not of victory, not of apology, but of quiet understanding. Then she left. Not a dramatic exit. Just, walked away. Melissa stood there alone again. She looked at the freshly planted seeds. Maybe they would grow. Maybe they wouldn't. But the choice to plant, that mattered. Weeks passed. Spring arrived. The wildflowers bloomed, right there by the tree. People never talked much about Karen anymore. New families moved in, old memories faded, and Melissa's story became less about revenge and more about renewal. Her cabin became a place where neighbors stopped by with questions, or to borrow tools, or simply to sit on the porch and watch the sunset. And Melissa? She stayed. Not because she had no other place to go, but because she had finally found the one that felt right. A place where peace wasn't forced. A place where justice had a name. A place where a woman who once lost everything in a sewer drain, built something beautiful that no one could ever throw away again.